Welcome to the P.A.S. Report Weekly Roundup Podcast. The P.A.S. Report provides an honest analysis on the critical issues that matter to you without the biased media filters. Here's your host, Professor Nicholas Giordano.
What's up, everyone? Welcome to the P.A.S. Report Podcast. This is your host, Nick Giordano. Glad you could be here. I hope you had a nice Memorial Day weekend, but it's important to remember that Memorial Day is supposed to be a somber day. It's not all about the sales at the stores. It's not about the barbecues and hanging out and having fun. It's about remembering those who paid the ultimate sacrifice in defense of this nation from the American Revolution to the present day. Unfortunately, we've lost sight of that. And unfortunately, we have lost sight of what this nation is all about, what the founding fathers intended when it came to limited government and the abuses of power. It's time to reflect, because I think it is extremely important. Those that have fallen in defense of this nation, how would they feel about everything going on today? We have to ask ourselves that question, because it is so important. The levels of corruption and the abuses of power that we are witnessing are nothing short of breathtaking. And unfortunately, so many continue to bury their heads in the sand, not recognize that this represents the mortal danger to the republic, that this is everything that the founding fathers warned about. When government gets too big, too bloated, too powerful, sadly, there are too many who want to ignore these abuses. But we're not going to let that happen. I got a great episode lined up for today. I got a fantastic guest. Before I get to the guest, make sure you go to the PAS Report website, pasreport.com, sign up for the newsletter over there, and make sure you follow the podcast so you never miss an episode. Share it with your family, your friends, on social media, because I think that we are at a critical juncture here in the United States. We're at a critical point in our history. And where we go from here, the road that we take, is going to determine whether we continue this move towards authoritarianism and an all-powerful government, or are we going to start to reflect and get back to the original intent within the system. I'm going to be joined today by one of my favorite guests, Miranda Devine, author of Laptop from Hell, New York Post columnist. She just wrote a fantastic column that outlines and highlights the FBI corruption, the abuses of power that exist within the system, and she felt it firsthand. So she has direct experience with the abuses of power, especially when it comes to our intelligence community. She just wrote a fantastic column for the New York Post. I have the link up at the PAS Report website, so you can check it out there, which highlights 3 areas that are critically important to understand what is going on, what has happened. And I want to start off, Miranda, welcome to the PAS Report. Thank you for joining me. I want to start off with the column going step by step. You start off with the Durham Report. What is your biggest takeaway from the Durham Report, and what does it really show about the FBI?
Well, thanks for having me, Nick. I think the Durham Report, because it came so late, most of these revelations, which are real bombshells, one after the other, have already been revealed. And so I guess it's good to have it, the official version there, and it should cause earthquakes, and it should cause a lot of soul searching within the FBI. There should have been an official mea culpa, but of course there wasn't. And you know what it shows is that the Clinton campaign was behind the whole Russia collusion hoax, that the FBI higher-ups knew that and still ordered their underlings to pursue the Steele dossier and the other allegations, the Alpha Bank allegations, as if they were legitimate leads that needed to be tracked down, even when their agents in the field came back and said, you know, this is ridiculous, this is nothing. They were still told that the 7th floor, meaning where James Comey and Andrew McCabe and all their cronies worked, that they were, you know, hot to trot on these allegations and wanted them to go through. And, you know, at the same time, we find that, and I think this was new, or I didn't know the extent of it, that there were 4 probes into the Clinton Foundation, 4 investigations into the Clinton Foundation that were simply dropped. So not only
they were all dropped right before the election, correct?
That's right. All this time frame is right before the 2016 election. And so not only was the FBI putting its thumb on the scale on behalf of Hillary Clinton, but also against Donald Trump. It was exaggerating and inflating any rumor or morsel that came across their desk to traduce Donald Trump, and downplaying and suppressing the real evidence of wrongdoing about Hillary Clinton. And that was, whether it be her email server, which as Secretary of State, she was, had an insecure, unauthorized location, or whether it be all the money that was flowing into the Clinton Foundation, which was, a version of the sort of influence peddling that we're looking at with Joe Biden and his family.
Yeah, it really is crazy. But there was something interesting that actually wasn't mentioned in the report. So this 300-page report that was issued by Durham, one of the things that I found really interesting is he never interviewed James Comey, Andrew McCabe, no. Peter Strzok. Do you have any idea why it is? And is there something that Durham is trying to put out there by not interviewing them?
Look, I just think he was behaving like a gentleman. I mean, I don't think he was trying to protect them. He is quite scathing about them, but he just matter-of-factly says that each one of them declined to sit for an interview. And he had the power to compel them to come in and testify, but he didn't use that power. Why he didn't, I have no idea. I mean, you might have more of an idea than I do.
Well, this would be speculation on my part, but one of the things, something that I'm thinking, I mean, obviously I didn't speak to Durham, so I can't answer for him, but if he did bring him in for an interview, we have to understand it is the Merrick Garland Department of Justice. It is the Biden administration. And if he did bring him into an interview, they would have either pleaded the fifth or asked for immunity. By not bringing them for an interview, they don't get any immunity granted to them, and there's no statute of limitations on conspiracy. So do you think that Durham is potentially leaving the door open for another administration to come in and revisit this? Do you think that's a possibility?
I hadn't thought of that. That sounds plausible enough. That would be a kind of 3D chess that I'm not sure he was playing, but maybe so. Throughout the report, he talks about the kind of limits of the law and also the reality that, for instance, in Washington, D.C., you're not going to get a jury that is going to really give you the kind of decisions that probably justice would warrant. And that one example of that was, what was his name? Durham tried him, Michael Sussman. He was the lawyer who brought the Alpha Bank garbage to the FBI, to his mate James Baker. And James Baker, of course, pretending, I didn't know that any of this was untoward. And Michael
the
Sussman,
same James Baker that censored you, just so you know.
Well, that's right. The same James Baker who suddenly, miraculously got parachuted into Twitter 3 months before the 2020 election and was instrumental in censoring the New York Post story on the laptop. But not only that, later on when Elon Musk took over, James Baker was intervening in the sort of material that Elon Musk had ordered to be released to Matt Taibbi and a couple of other independent journalists. And he was again, James Baker, putting his thumb on the scale until Elon Musk found out and got rid of him.
Yeah.
But anyway, Michael Sussman was tried with the DC jury, and the DC jury let him off. And I remember a juror being interviewed and saying, well, he didn't mislead the FBI. The FBI knew exactly what they were getting. And in a way, that's true. The jury was right that the FBI was in cahoots as well. But what do you do about the FBI? And I think that's the elephant in the room, because they're completely out of control. But the Republicans have very little power other than the power of the purse.
Well, and I want to get to that, but before we do, last week we saw the testimony of 3 FBI whistleblowers, and I'm sure you watched it. It was in your column. What did you make of their testimony and the retribution they faced by the FBI? I mean, you had a special agent claim that the FBI will destroy you. They'll try and destroy your life if you expose them for what they really do and what they are.
And he's right. That's what they did to him. This is Garrett O'Boyle, FBI special agent, suspended without pay. This is he, as with the others, they went the right way up the whistleblower, chain of command, made protected disclosures. I know for sure that Stephen Friend was doing that because I was talking to his lawyer and could not interview him until he had made, the right, done the right whistleblower disclosures and so on. And so he did everything by the book, and as they all did. They know the law, and yet they were just smeared by the FBI, suspended without pay, as I say, but also were unable to get, I know Stephen Friend told me, he couldn't get another job in security because the FBI refused to release his gun, his gun record, whatever it was. And they refused to, for all of them, refused to release information that would allow them to get another job. As well, were leaking private details from their health records and other records, employment records, completely illegal. And then Garrett O'Boyle was, he was sent with his family. He has 4 little kids, at that point a 2-week-old baby. And he was posted, he lived in Kansas. He was posted to Virginia, drove across the country with his family, turns up, they'd sold their house in Kansas, turns up first day of work, gets suspended. They knew they were suspending him, but they let him upheave his entire family and move them across the country. They were homeless. All their belongings were in storage, and the FBI would not let them have them. So they're cold, they're hungry, they're homeless, and they can't even get their clothes out of storage. Took 2 weeks for the FBI to release that. That is just, a deliberate, just malicious and vicious kind of torture of someone who's been a loyal agent and a military veteran who had served, combat tours in Iraq and Afghanistan for the 101st Airborne. Just despicable. And, Marcus Allen also, he was an FBI employee, also served in the military with distinction. Stephen Friend, also, a former police officer before he became an FBI special agent. Again, exemplary record. These men are upstanding citizens. They are, heroes out of central casting. And, when I saw them there, I know a couple of them a little. And when I saw them sitting there, I just saw, just these very courageous men, but they looked depressed, because you would be. I mean, they're downcast. Like, these are men who loved their job. They were doing the right thing. They were on the side of good against evil. And, Stephen Friend, for instance, was tracking down pedophiles in conjunction with the local police force in Florida. And he had to, he was told by his bosses that he had to drop that work and get into the January 6th stuff that was being farmed out from the Washington field office. And he quickly realized that it was just bogus, that they were doing SWAT raids. He was part of a SWAT team, that SWAT raids were being ordered on non-violent people who were willing to, hand themselves in and negotiate through their lawyers. These were not difficult people. And these were non-violent people. They talk about people who went on a bus to Washington, D.C. to see the president speak on January 6, 2021. That's all they did. They went on a bus. They did not go near the Capitol. Every single person on that bus gets investigated, and so on. So this litany of disgusting behaviour by the FBI, these men had consciences, and their consciences would not allow them to be party to this. And so they made complaints to their superiors and up through the ranks and became whistleblowers. And their reward is that they come before Congress to tell what they know about FBI targeting parents at school board meetings, about FBI targeting Catholics, all the revelations that we've heard in the last year or so about the FBI have come from these men and others like them.
Just to interrupt you for a second, especially when it comes to Stephen Friend, he did expose how the FBI was overinflating the domestic terrorism numbers, that the FBI is trying to pad the numbers in order to make the threat seem worse than it really appears. It's not to say that no threat exists, but it certainly doesn't exist the way it's being framed today by the Department of Homeland Security, the FBI, the CIA, and all the other alphabet agencies. We're going to take a quick break, but when we get back, I want to explore this overinflating of numbers, and I want to bring up the national strategy because it's all tied in with each other. So sit tight. We'll be right back. Listen up, P.A.S. Report audience. Experts say that China is hoarding a massive amount of food. They're soon going to have over 2/3 of the globe's corn reserves, over half its rice reserves, and over half its wheat reserves. But when asked about it, China lies. And one expert says that they, of course, will never admit to doing something like that. Well, what does China know that we don't? When it comes to the global food shortages, China is the canary in the coal mine. And you have to understand, China is the world's #1 food importer. They rely on the rest of the world to keep their people fed, so they can't afford to mess up. There'll be riots, civil panic, or even worse, when over 1 billion people can't eat. It's going to create a crisis for them. What does that mean for us? What does that mean for Americans like me and you? Food shortages. That's why it's a smart idea to stock up on a kit of the best-selling 4 Patriot survival food. Create your own stockpile of the best-selling 4 Patriot survival food kits. It's hand-packed in the United States. The kits are compact, stack easily. They have different delicious breakfasts, lunches, and dinners, and I can attest to that because I use 4 Patriots, and their 5-star reviews on the website rave about the flavor and taste. Right now, you can get 10% off your first purchase of 4 Patriot survival food by typing in the code PAS at checkout. Just go to 4patriots.com, use code PAS to get 10% off your first purchase of 4 Patriot survival food. That's 4patriots.com. Use code PAS. Welcome back, everyone. And before the break, I brought up the idea of overinflating the numbers. Stephen Friend, the FBI whistleblower, was explaining how the numbers are overinflated. And I want to tie in the national strategy because the national strategy for countering domestic terrorism was issued in June of 2021, and it explains how anyone who expresses anti-government, anti-authority sentiment can be classified as a domestic terrorist, that social media posts can be deemed insightful, and therefore you could be classified as domestic terrorist. It goes all the way down to parents at school board meetings that are complaining about curriculums. So when we look at the overinflation of numbers and the national strategy and put it together, doesn't it appear that the threat of domestic terrorism has actually remained pretty flat over the last 40 years? Isn't that really the case?
Well, exactly. And you pinpointed that before. What the FBI was doing was, instead of what they used to do was, if there was, say, a group, a gang, there would be one case file opened. And in that case file would be, different files for different people. But what they changed this time to inflate the numbers was that they would open a new case file for every person, even if it was like, say, I don't know, the oath keepers in a certain area that they were looking at. There should be one case file, but they opened a case file on every single person. And so that just inflates the numbers 5-fold, 10-fold. And suddenly you have this huge spike in domestic terrorism. And of course, they're all, white men, right wing, supposedly, because they vote for Trump. So that's where you get this complete lie that you have hear from the lips of President Biden about, semi-fascist white Republican Trump voters are all conflated with being domestic terrorists, and that's the #1 threat to America.
It's ridiculous. And I look at it. So last week I was seeing a lot of videos of a group called the Patriot Front, and they're all wearing their beige khakis with their blue shirts. They all look like federal agents themselves. But what I find amazing, and I will say this over and over again when it comes to the idea of white supremacy, is when it comes to the Italian mob, we have the organizational flow charts of who's the boss, who's the underboss, the capos, the soldiers. When it comes to groups like Al-Qaeda and ISIS, who's the leader, who are the lieutenants, who are the soldiers? When it comes to MS-13, we have a breakdown. You would think we have all these organizations, Patriot Front, Oath Keepers. Where are the command and control charts? Where's the FBI coming out and telling us what their operational capabilities are? Why isn't the FBI providing any advice? So in 2001, we had the See Something, Say Something campaign. They provided advice. If you see a person in a winter jacket and it's 95 degrees outside, that's suspicious. You may want to tell someone about that. If you see wires hanging out of a bag, that's suspicious. the FBI hasn't provided any information about any of these groups, who's in charge, who are part of these groups. They'll release the whistleblower names, they'll attack the whistleblowers, but yet they reveal nothing on this amorphous threat of white supremacy that you have the president going out there speaking at a graduation in front of a black college, telling them about white supremacy, and yet we know nothing about it. So it tells me the whole thing's a ruse, and it is a ruse, but it gets to the next point of your article where you explain how the FISA court has come out, lambasted the FBI for conducting over 300,000 searches that weren't warranted, that shouldn't have been conducted. They conducted 3.2 million searches over the course of the last year. It is amazing, the surveillance state that we now live in and how easy it is for the FBI to gain access. And this is on top of the courts lambasting the FBI on 4 other occasions about illegally accessing the NSA's repository on Americans. Does the FBI feel that it's above the law? I mean, I guess they do because no one's ever held accountable, but they have no regard for the judicial branch. They certainly have no regard for Congress. We've witnessed that. And it seems as if this agency thinks that it's independent of any type of accountability.
Oh, definitely. And that's the central point, I think. Completely unaccountable, spying on American citizens willy-nilly against the law, just no remorse. Every time they get caught and Congress tries to do something about it, or there's an outcry in the public, they sort of say, oh, no, don't worry, we fixed that. We have some trainings. And, I know from Steve Friend, he says trainings after the Inspector General Michael Horowitz's report, which mirrored a lot of what was in, and a lot earlier, mirrored a lot of what was in the Durham Report, came out. The trainings that were supposedly done to solve those issues there were, Steve Friend said, you get an email saying, oh, there's this electronic thing that you've got to go through that everybody in every workplace has ever had to do, some HR module that you get sent, and you don't want to do it, and you just click through it as fast as you can, and none of it makes any difference. So they didn't change any so-called policies and practices. It was just business as usual. And they factor into business as usual that every now and then Congress is going to wag their finger and, there might be a few stories and a few angry, tweets. And they don't care because no one has control over them. And we had 4 years of the Trump administration and nothing happened. James Comey, we knew that he was a disaster. We knew that Andrew McCabe, they left. And who did they get replaced with? Christopher Wray, who apparently was recommended by Chris Christie, who thinks he's going to run for president now. Christopher Wray, if anything, I just watched his confirmation hearing again and the answers that he was giving. The same sort of smarmy, not quite as arrogant because he was auditioning for the job, but it was pretty much a done deal. There was only one person who voted against him, and that was Rand Paul. But the rest of them, it was all just cozy questions. But Chuck Grassley did ask him, are you going to ensure that that there is more accountability, you're more transparent, that you are more, that the FBI is more responsive to our oversight, in Congress than James Comey was, and are you going to make sure that you aren't political? And he assured everybody that all of this, in fact, under him, it's become more political and less transparent. His arrogance in those oversight hearings is breathtaking. I cannot believe that Chuck Grassley and the rest of the senators tolerate it. If you remember, I think it was last year, mid-year, he had an oversight Senate hearing, and he told Chuck Grassley, you could hear it on the tape, because he went up to speak to him personally before he left early. He said he had to leave early because he had to, it was work. Chuck Grassley said, oh, is it work? And he said, yes. Well, that was not true. He was going to the airport to get the FBI jet to the Adirondacks, where he has a holiday house for the weekend. So he was leaving town early, leaving the hearing early to get on the FBI's jet, which he treats as his own private plaything. And That just sums it up for me. And even though there was an outcry afterwards, we wrote a story about what he was doing, and there was an outcry about the FBI jet. But, I watched that jet. He still takes it to his home in Atlanta every weekend, or, every other weekend. He, in Buckhead, there's no remorse, there's no accountability, there's no oversight. It's an organization that is completely out of control and has enormous powers to destroy people's lives. And you're seeing now how it is destroying people's lives. Anybody to do with January 6th, whether they're violent, whether they're threats, whether they're ideological, grandmothers, people who did nothing wrong that day and nothing illegal are being rounded up and swatted and having their lives destroyed. So are the FBI infiltrating Catholic masses because they think that traditional Catholics, are somehow incipient domestic terrorists. It's just being captured by this ideology, which is antagonistic to conservatives, basically.
Yeah, and just so the audience is aware, I mean, we've seen a number of pro-life clinics that have been firebombed or vandalized over the course of the last year. And yet the FBI has been targeting pro-life protesters who silently pray in front of abortion clinics and storm their homes with SWAT, as you said. I mean, it is completely backwards. I think one of the most frustrating things was when I was watching the hearing with the whistleblowers was people like Congresswoman Debbie Wasserman Schultz, where she was questioning whether these are even whistleblowers. And she said that, well, the agency doesn't view them as whistleblowers. So they're calling out the FBI. They're the ones that are blowing the whistle on the FBI abuse of powers, but the FBI doesn't want to grant them whistleblower status. And you have Democrats actually defending that. They would never do that in any other circumstance, but because it doesn't fit their political narrative, they are doing this. They're trying to destroy the reputations as well. I think that's what's frustrating. Do you think it's time that we have a conversation about potentially disbanding the FBI? Do you think it may be that the reputation of the FBI is so beyond repair that it's never going to be able to heal from these abuses, even if they do get in the right leadership?
Well, yes. I mean, I think the reputation is one thing. You're looking at, there was a Harvard-Harris poll the other day showing, I think it was 71%, 7 out of 10 Americans now think that the FBI has been intervening in elections and that something has to be done. They're worried, they're concerned.
And that has to include a lot of Democrats, correct?
Of course. It does include Democrats, but a huge number of independents as well. I think the number for Democrats was slightly under 50%, but not much. But it was a big number of Republicans, 80-something, and then but independents was a big number as well. So, but they're concerned that 7 out of 10 are concerned that the FBI will interfere with the 2024 election, and I have no doubt they will. I mean,
haven't they already started?
They won't. Well, yeah, of course. I mean, it's a constant rolling maul.
It is,
it's not just the reputation though. It's the culture of the place, and it's very difficult once a corrupt culture has taken over a vast organization. It's very difficult to root it out, and you see examples of that in police forces around the world. And I know from experience about it in Australia. And, there was a royal commission, which is the first step. And so here, I guess it'll be something like a church commission, and in which all the dirty laundry is brought out. And that's, a couple of years of real pain, and at which stage, during which the organisation cannot work. I mean, they're not doing what they should be doing. And it's a real convulsion, and good people get damaged, etc. And then after that, you have new leadership and new policies and so on. It doesn't really work, though, because you sort of think that you've crushed the culture, but it's like cancer. You almost have to kill the organism before you actually can build up again. So I agree. I don't know if you're just not better off just disbanding the whole thing and starting a new smaller organization and outsourcing, as the FBI whistleblowers have suggested, outsourcing some of the the work that the FBI does in terms of criminal work, to marshals, to more empowerment of local police departments, more funding of them, and the FBI has become so focused on intelligence that it's really become a domestic CIA.
Yeah, if you do that, if you do what you said, that would send a message to every other government agency and department that if you abuse the powers, there's going to be consequences. There's a reason that the founders wanted limited government.
Yeah.
And I have to ask this final question because obviously it's come out that you had Mike Morrell, the former CIA director, that he was the one working alongside in cahoots with Secretary of State Tony Blinken to put out the letter to try and discredit the New York Post, your story, breaking the Hunter Biden and the Biden family business scheme that's been going on for years. How do you feel now that, I mean, you always knew it was total garbage that these 51 intelligence agents would say this, but how do you feel now that it's aware? The American public is aware, including Democrats. Many of them said that they would have changed their vote had they known. How do you feel now?
Well, I think I'm pleased that we knew what was going on, but now to see the names and the faces and also evidence of the connection to the Biden campaign is the holy grail. When you realize that it was Antony Blinken, who was then, Joe Biden's senior foreign policy advisor, who is the one who calls Mike Morrell and gets him, mild-mannered Mike Morrell, who was angling to become the next CIA director. What makes it sort of hilarious in a dark way is that he thought that he was going to be Biden's CIA director, and he'd been acting director twice, so close and yet so far. He obviously didn't quite cut the mustard, and so he basically sold the soul of the CIA to the Biden campaign in order to get that golden bauble, and he never got it in the end. He never was CIA director, so he has egg all over his face, as well as being shown up as being a really not a great person. And he engineered this letter, knowing full well that this was not Russian disinformation, and Antony Blinken pretending that he just was asking a friend for advice. No. He sent him an article from USA Today saying that the FBI suspected it was Russian disinformation a few hours after the phone call. Another one of the Morell's henchmen who was helping him prepare this document, this letter, he told the investigators in the House who were uncovering all of this that, he did hear that the campaign wanted us to do this. The campaign was very happy when they did it. It was a campaign job, and it was carried out by former CIA directors, 5 of them, including the acting one, Mike Morrell. But also what was sinister about this was there was at least one acting CIA employee who was involved. And we know that because one of the signatories of the letter was talking to this CIA employee because he had his own memoirs that he was trying to get cleared through their pre-classification review process. And this CIA employee said, no problem, your book's going to be fine. And then he said, by the way, do you want to sign this letter? So there he was, a CIA employee soliciting signatures for this letter. That is deeply disturbing. And I am surprised that the CIA director, William Casey, is it William Casey? Whatever his name is, hasn't come out and issued a statement to say that, we're looking into this and heads will roll and this is not acceptable for the CIA to get involved in domestic politics. But you hear nothing from these people. You hear no shame, no
they don't care.
Remorse. They don't care. And also, half the country doesn't care because the media their media, the New York Times, the Washington Post, etc., never writes about it. And Google suppresses the search terms on it. So the story never really gets up ahead of steam. And, those of us who understand it, who know what's going on, are kind of screaming in a padded cell that's soundproof, and the rest of America can't hear.
That's so true. And whenever these fools come out there and talk about threats to democracy, they are the biggest threat to democracy. These self-anointed guardians of democracy represent the biggest threat, because an all-powerful bureaucracy with unelected, nameless and faceless bureaucrats with the power to destroy lives has run rampant. And the reason that the CIA director won't come out and make this statement is because he doesn't have to, because he doesn't care. He doesn't have to. He knows nothing's going to happen. No one's going to be held accountable. Last question. Do you think that Congress, at the end of the year, they have to reauthorize Section 702? Republicans stupidly reauthorized it back in 2018, even though they knew at that point that it was abused by the FBI. Do you think they're going to make that mistake again and reauthorize Section 702? Or do you think that Republicans and even Democrats are getting a little worried about this runaway bureaucracy?
Look, I think the Republicans in the House are pretty savvy and aware now of what's going on. And I think they're also disgusted by the arrogance the FBI is showing. Perfect example is James Comer, chairman of the House Oversight Committee, has subpoenaed this document, a 1023 form, which is a confidential source interview with the FBI. And he's spoken, Kevin McCarthy has even spoken personally, I believe, in the last couple of days to Christopher Wray. And the FBI is just refusing to comply with this lawful subpoena because they can. And so I think the House Republicans are not in any mood to do anything the FBI wants, and they want to cause them pain. The problem is that, in the Senate, first of all, the Republicans don't have a majority. But second of all, yes, Mitch McConnell. And I just suspect that maybe, because Biden used to be in the Senate, because Biden thinks that he and McConnell are friends, maybe they have a back channel conversation and they do some horse trading. And really, all Mitch McConnell, he's told us, all he cares about is Ukraine. So I'm sure that McConnell is trading everything as long as, more weapons, more aid, more billions go to the war in Ukraine. He will throw every Republican under the bus in this country in order to have his pet project. Lindsey Graham's just the same. When you're talking about the debt limit negotiations, in the Senate, the Republicans are just saying, oh, we're not going to get much. Maybe we'll claw back a bit of COVID money. Forget the 87,000 new IRS agents that the Republicans campaigned on abolishing that new PAT money during the 2022 midterms. But no, in the Senate Republicans, they say, no, Chuck Schumer won't agree to that. Really? I mean, the Republicans have the ability to cause a lot of problems, at least financially, with their hold over the purse. And I hope that they use that to extract concessions on all sorts of things, but including not funding a new headquarters for the FBI at the very least.
Well, they should actually fund new headquarters for the FBI. Just move it out of Washington, D.C. and put it in the middle of America. You get the FBI out of D.C., I think that the environment will change surrounding the FBI. That would be an interesting idea. But Miranda, I always appreciate you coming on. Your columns are always the best in the business. Everyone should check her out. We're going to have links up on the P.A.S. report. Miranda, thank you for joining us.
Thanks, Nick. Great to talk to you again.
I always enjoy my conversations with Miranda. She's the best in the business. As I said, you got to check out her columns. Read Laptop from Hell. She is the one that should have won the Pulitzer Prize. The New York Times should have to give the Pulitzer Prize to her because of all their false reporting when it came to Russian collusion. In any event, I have the links up at the P.A.S. report website, so connect with her, follow her, and follow her work. You won't be disappointed. Remember to share this episode with your family and friends and on social media. If you find the podcast informative, I always appreciate a 5-star rating on any podcast platform that allows it. Also, write a review, take 30 seconds. That's appreciated as well. I want to thank you for joining me. I'll be back on Wednesday with another great episode of the P.A.S. Report podcast.
Thank you for listening to the P.A.S. Report Weekly Roundup Podcast.
Have a good one. Bye.
Be sure to rate, share, and subscribe to the podcast so you'll never miss an episode. Also, visit PASreport.com and follow us on Twitter at PAS Report.